Hey guys, welcome to Modern. I'm Rahman, and this episode I wanted to talk about the release of new camera gear this week. So, around this time, all camera companies and even technology companies they tend to release new gear that comes out. This week we had like releases from Canon, Panasonic, and Sony, in just those three camera companies. Nikon was kind of missing from this list, but maybe they'll have something coming up later on this year. But first, we're going to talk about Canon's new camera gear. And Canon released the 90D, which appears to be their replacement for the 70 Mark II and the EOS 80D. The other camera that they released was the EOS M6 Mark II, which replaced the EOS M6. Yeah, people were kind of positive. I wouldn't say positive. They were like, they were just like, oh yeah, yeah, Canon. But this was another trend of Canon releasing a DSLR that had 4K in it, which was the 90D. I think the M6 also had 4K, but I think there were a lot of people who were critical about the 4K in the M6. I think some people said that it was what did they say? That it was 2K that was upscaled to make it 4K, and it wasn't really any good. I'm waiting for more tests to come out. I don't want to be one of those people that judges things by a spec sheet or by what they hear, and all of a sudden they want to create a rumors, and all of a sudden get angry over a rumor. Test it out and see how it looks, and then go from there. Don't obsess over spec sheets and promo sheets, and that's what does that prove, right? So outside of these cameras, there were also lenses that were going to be released. Not really lenses that you could use with these cameras. So the lenses that got released were RF lenses that work with the EOS R and the EOS RP system of cameras. These were the wide-angle RF 15 to 35 f2.8 and the RF 24 to 70 f2.8. And since the EOS R system doesn't have a lot of new lens, I think a lot of people were waiting for these. These kind of fit with they fit more along the lines of I think filmmaking, because they're zooms, because they're faster lenses. F2.8 is kind of a really great aperture for zoom lens. Great for low light too. So getting back to the 90D and the EOS M6 Mark II, both cameras lacked 24 frames per second in video mode. So that continues a trend of Canon taking away something that was present in previous generation cameras. It's so weird. It's confusing that they keep on doing this to the new cameras that they release. Certain camera manufacturers, certain companies don't like to put out a product that kind of like eliminates the need for another older, higher price product. And I think that's what maybe they're thinking about in this case by taking away something like 24 frames per second. But it's just a bad way to go. Because other camera companies aren't doing that. Panasonic and Sony, and Nikon, they don't do that. It seems like somebody should put their arm around Canon, and talk to them and say, hey, you know what, you don't need to do this. There's another way, buddy. There's another way. But they're not doing that. Let me see. So another thing that DP Review noted was that there was like a lot of rolling shutter in the M6 Mark II. So, And I don't know if they notice it in the 90D. I think more tests will need to come out until we finally find out how these cameras will look with the other cameras in the lineup. But so the 90D sounds like it's packed with features that make it more of a sports related camera. It was kind of puzzling that the Canon released the 90D as kind of like a DSLR, not a mirrorless, not something that you could put along the lines with the EOS R. It still uses like the same battery that the 5D EOS R and the 80D were using. I think it's the LP6 something complicated battery naming structure, but yeah, that was kind of it for, unless I'm missing anything, that was kind of it for Canon's release this week. I'm sure they'll have something later in the year that they're just waiting to drop. But for now, it's those two cameras and those two lenses. So next, I want to talk about Panasonic's new camera gear, and really they just had one big camera coming out, which was the Panasonic Lumix SH1, and the SH1 really looked like if you were to take a GH5 and put it into the body of a full frame camera. It's got the flip screen, it's got IBIS, it's got 10-bit. Jordan Drake on DP Review did like a really great informative video on this camera. Some of the footage looked good. It's 6K footage, which a lot of people are going to be loving. A lot of video creators, I should say. They didn't do anything, any tests related to. They didn't do any tests related to the photos that were coming from the camera. I would have liked to seen it, but yeah, it makes me wonder. Are the photos from that camera that lackluster that they didn't want to do any test? Because the GH5 photos are pretty average. I'm sure if you use a certain, if you get in the right setting, you can produce good photos from the GH5. But yeah, I mean, I would think since it's full frame, the photos would at least look decent. But this is a video camera first. So reportedly the price tag for the SH1 is going to be $4,000, which is pretty expensive. There are a lot cheaper full frame cameras that you could probably get, but nothing that'll have the features that the SH1 will have. So I'm trying to think where it's going to be slotted among like the full frame video cameras. Like supposedly there's a rumor that that Sony is going to release the A7S3, and the A7S has always been their line of video related cameras. So I wonder like how that's going to look. And I think Sony Alpha Rumors on Twitter reported that apparently these are rumors, so take them for a grain of salt, that the rumor was that the A7S3 beat the SH1 along in terms of specs. But I guess we'll see whenever that gets released, because everyone seems to be impatient. There was a new lens that got released for the SH1. Let me see if I can find that. So supposedly Panasonic released a new lens too, but I don't see any details regarding that. So maybe. I guess that's the only one that's the only thing coming from Panasonic, unless I'm wrong. But if that's like the only thing, I think it's still pretty damn good from Panasonic. The only thing is that there's definitely a lack of lenses for the SH1 and other full frame cameras that Panasonic is putting out there, and it's still a new system. I mean, they've got two other full frame cameras that are rolling about, so it's like, you know, it's hard to dive completely in that system if you don't have lenses to match putting lenses on the SH1. So I know there are some adapters flying around, and I think maybe Sigma might be making some lenses for the system, but it's still going to take a long time to get those new lenses for the system, new full frame lenses for the system. So the last company that released something new this week was Sony, and Sony released two APS-C cameras, the A6600 and the A6100. Both these are crop frame APS-C cameras, and both have flip-up screens. The A6600 has a new Z battery, like the A7 III and the A7R, latest A7R cameras. So that means that they've at least fixed that one glaring weakness that a lot of Sony mirrorless cameras when they first came out had, which was low battery life. You had to carry like 3 extra batteries around. So that's pretty good. And plus flip screens, people, they finally brought the flip screens back, which is good. A lot of people, this new release by Sony was kind of, it seemed to anger a lot of people. Like, a lot of people were kind of like, I think a lot of Sony users were like expecting something more, like the next step in these cameras. They both have 4K, I think, but I think it's only 4K and 24 frames per second, and not like 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. So maybe, and also it still use 8-bit codecs compared to the GH5 that has like, it uses 10-bit and also 8-bit. So I think maybe that's why people were kind of miffed about these new two cameras. I think it's a step in direction. I think these cameras are okay. I'm not someone that's going to get upset about, hey, if you're upset, don't buy it. And it sounds like, there's more on the way from Sony. Sony's always kind of, let me think. Yeah, Sony's always, they're innovative. Although some of the decisions from Sony can be like, there's no perfect cameras. There's no perfect, camera that does everything. There's, this brand does something good. This brand does something, this brand is great at, making videos. This brand is, this camera brand is great at taking photos. So you're never going to get something where it's just like this total perfect camera. So, I think it's, a step in the right direction. At least bringing the Z battery into these APS-C crop frame cameras, I think, is a step in the right direction. Kind of surprised that they didn't do that for the A6100. That's the only thing I was like, why? You could, do it. But I don't know, maybe there's too much, like, it would make sense if they did it. Like, if the A6100 used the same body that the A6600 used, they were like the same bodies, you'd save money, I would think. unless the A6100 use, the A6400's body. So they're like, okay, we'll save it that way and charge a much higher price for the A6600. But geez, throwing around these long, complicated letters and numbers. Can they just like I almost wish like camera companies would use like a nickname, like or just a name for like their camera bodies instead of like making it so complicated. Like treat them like they're cars, call it a Camaro or call it a Skyline. Something that makes it, a little bit more easy to say. But so it looks like those are all the that's the camera news for this week. At the end of the year, you normally expect companies, whether they're camera companies or whether they're technology companies, to come out to release something new towards the end of the year. Apple, Google, all these companies, they put out new phones toward the end of the year. They have like the big events where people, get all dressed up, and then they invite, all the influencers and, media people to see the new product. So, there's still, enough time. This is, we're still technically in August, so there's still going to be something coming up. But that's pretty much it for this week. I like talking about camera gear because it interests me, and when a company does release a new product, I find it as news. My overall opinion is that if this gear helps you as a creative and makes your job easier, then it's definitely worth looking into. I know there's all type of talk about gear acquisition syndrome and always wanting to, get the next thing, and it could be tempting when companies keep releasing like the next new thing, like this will take your stuff to the next level, and generally you could like get around with what you already have, or things that were popular this year. But that doesn't just happen with cameras. It happens with the latest new cell phone that is like the next thing and has all these features. So just if it's something that helps you as a creative, then I see no issue with it. Alternatively, there's always someone, I think it was Joshua Martin, a videographer on Instagram, brought up that there's nothing wrong with, going the rental route, renting something first and testing it out. And I've done that. I still do that with like things that I think I want to test beforehand. I'll definitely, go out and rent it and see if this is something that I would like to, use as part of my process. When in doubt, rent. If you are on the fence about whether you want to buy something or not. So what do you think about these new offerings from these camera companies? Do you plan on buying any of the new gear that is being offered? Please let me know in the comments section. I would love to hear your opinion on all this new gear that's coming out. So finally, I would like to say thank you for joining me for today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share the channel. Thank you, and I'll see you guys in the next one.